Hey there, this is Pat Ennis of Ennis Legacy Partners. Welcome to the Exit Readiness podcast. I'm here with co-host Walter Dial, CPA and tax partner at GRF CPAs and Advisors in Bethesda, Maryland. We also have with us today my business partner, Corby McGordon. Our mission here on the podcast is to provide you, the business owner, with subject matter expertise on topics pertaining to building a sellable or transferable business and then exiting, planning for your eventual exit from the business. We want to help you build a business that's sellable and then exit successfully on your own terms and conditions. Today, we're going to hear from a gentleman who has indeed exited on his own terms and conditions with the successful implementation of an ESOP or employee stock ownership plan. We occasionally have expert Keith Apton from the Capitol ESOP Group here with us to review the pros and cons and inner workings of an ESOP. And we'd suggest that anyone who's interested at all in an ESOP, you go back and listen to those episodes with Keith. But today our guest is right now experiencing an ESOP as a selling owner. And we want to hear about what's going well. And I've talked to him before, and it seems like most everything's going well, if not everything. And what might not be going as well as expected, again, if anything. And so today's topic is a successful ESOP story. And our guest is Kris DenBesten, the past owner, I think we can say at this point, of Vermeer Southeast Sales and Service, which was a second generation family business. Kris established in 1967 until the family recently sold it within the last 3 years to an ESOP. Kris has served as CEO in the past and until recently, when he assumed the role of executive chairman. So today we're going to hear from Kris about what to be aware of when considering an ESOP as an owner for your exit, how to prepare the business for an ESOP, and the potential pitfalls or when it may not make sense for you as an exit route. And then too, we want to hear about his motivations, because motivations have so much to do with any exit route you choose. Absolutely. Whether it be a sale to a third party, sale to insiders, sale to children, liquidation, whatever. But particularly as it pertains to an ESOP, what were your motivations for even considering it and then putting in place? So we want to hear that from him as well. So, hey, Kris, great to have you with us. Thanks for jumping in here with us today. We're very grateful and looking forward to our conversation.
Well, thanks for having me. I look forward to this.
Good. Well, let's begin. Let's get started here, Kris, with learning a little bit more about the business and your past and current role. Can you give us just a brief history of the business, how it was a generational business, and describe what it is you're doing now as executive chairman?
Sure. Well, we're an equipment dealership. So we have locations throughout Florida, Georgia, and Alabama. We have 11 of them. And my dad did start our dealership in 1967. Really cool success story, borrowed $5,000, moved to Florida to start an equipment company. He was the ultimate entrepreneur, the guy who did everything. As I graduated from college, kind of came into the company. I'm not an entrepreneur. I'm more of a team builder. So as things work out, I came in with my skills at the perfect time, as he had come in with his skills at the perfect time. So I have been through a transition, having bought out my father in 1999, along with a couple other guys as business partners. And the business grew really nicely. From that start of a $5,000 loan to this past year, we sold around $215 million in revenue with very strong EBITDA. It's just been a blessing, and our company has done well. So that's kind of the background of the business and how it got started.
Good. And then what about your role currently? You're no longer CEO, you're executive chairman now. What does an executive chairman do?
That's a great question. Well,
Play golf.
well, I try to do that up in Colasaja in the summers. Yeah, we, as executive chairman, obviously I chair the board. I'm also there to advise the CEO, who was clearly the guy I chose, who's doing quite well. I also am involved in looking at acquisitions if we are considering, growing through acquisition. I mentor young leaders, which is something I love to do. And our company's involved in doing some ministry projects, as well as we have chaplains in all of our locations. So I oversee the ministry and the chaplaincy that our company's done, mainly with the goal of making sure that the culture remains, true to what my father started and what we've done for many, many years. So that in a nutshell is my new job, which is actually kind of exciting.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Yeah, it really does. So Kris, a lot of the clients that Pat and I work with, they're not really sure what exit routes are available to them. So, we lay it out, and normally ESOP is just you kind of say it like, and then of course there's the ESOP, which wouldn't make sense for you. That tends to be the case for 99% of our clients. And part of the reason is because, a lot of them are smaller. Maybe they don't have a long history of really stable earnings, both of which are, kind of needed for an ESOP. So 2 questions for you. Who raised the option of ESOP with you, and what made your company a good candidate?
Oh yeah, those are great questions. I actually was the one that brought it to the forefront. We were looking at all the different scenarios. We had a outstanding young management team, that was doing great work and ready to go to that next level, but none of them had the financial resources to buy the company. And we were trying to think, how can we transition this company to them when they don't really have the resources? And I had heard of an ESOP, so I read a book and did, that kind of stuff. And then I did the smartest move that I can say I've ever made as it relates to transition. I brought in a group, much like you guys, to advise us, a professional group. And they actually did. They laid out 4 different ways we could transition our business and studied it. And they came back and said, on a scale of 1 to 10 for an ESOP, you guys are a 12.
Wow.
So yeah, it kind of, really solidified that's the route that we should take a look at going down. I can't preface that getting that professional help, especially in an ESOP, I wouldn't think anyone should take on something like that without really having a good study and with people that know what they're doing.
Yeah, for sure. It's a real niche specialty for sure. So did they discuss why you were a 12 out of 10? I mean, what were the characteristics of your company that made it such a grand slam?
Right. So one of the most important things in an ESOP is you have to have a selling ownership group that is willing to sell their business for what a valuator says it's worth. They're not trying to hit that higher number, or find some synergistic buyer that's going to overpay for the business. So because you can't overpay for an ESOP,
Right.
you have a professional who evaluates it, comes up with the exact right price, and that's what you sell it for. Now, that doesn't mean there's not negotiation or, making sure that fits into everyone's keeping, but that's probably the number one thing. And myself and my business partners, it was more important that we kept our culture in place and turned it over to these people that we've been working with all these years than it was to get that, I sold my business for way more than it was worth scenario. So that's number one. Number two is having that great management team that's ready to come in and do it. We didn't have much debt, so that helped a lot too. I'd say so culture, leadership team ready, and willingness to turn it over to that team versus trying to get the top dollar were the main reasons why they felt like we were such a good good match for an ESOP.
Yeah, and financially, you must have had a solid track record of good cash flow and things like that, right?
Yeah, we had been very conservative financially. My dad taught me that. We did go through some tough times as everyone, but just trying to keep as little debt on the books as possible. We're an equipment company, so our only debt is that we floor plan our equipment.
Yeah.
We try not to have any debt other than that. So that made us a great candidate for an ESOP as well.
Yeah, that's great. Congratulations. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
Chris, you mentioned that the management team was really functioning. How long did it take you to actually build that team? And were you building that team with a goal of passing it on to them or exiting as you were building it?
Not initially. Whenever you hire people, you're not necessarily hiring them with the thought that, hey, maybe one day I'll turn the business over to them. But no, we had always been very, we have a very strong culture. So when we hire people, we make real certain up front that they could fit our culture. And those that do end up really buying into it and loving it, they tend to stay. And those that perform really well get promoted. And then you begin to look at them as potential for that. The person who became our CEO, his name is Scott Coley. 20 years ago, when he came to the company, over time, I began to think this could be my replacement one day. I didn't tell him that, but I did begin to tell him that, like, it took about 3 years to put the whole ESOP together from conception to doing it. Not because it doesn't take that long once you decide to do it, but in the process of trying to decide to do it. And I talked to him then about it. I could see you being the CEO. I could see this becoming an ESOP where you would run it and this and that. And it happens over time, and you pick the ones that you feel, really good about and pour into them. And when they're ready, the company grew a lot when we turned it over to them. It was a great, successful turnover, transition. I had heard you want to hire somebody that replaces you that's better than you, and I was able to do that. So the other thing that I really wanted was I'd heard somebody say, a good leader when the leader steps aside and the company continues to thrive. A lot of times people think, oh, the leader left and the thing fell apart. It wasn't good leadership that came to. No, a real leader, it's the mark he leaves behind, because if the company thrives when the leader left, it meant the leader did his job while he was there. So that was, it's the personal goal of mine. And that's also proven itself out. Plus, when you're not that good, it's not that hard to find somebody better than you are.
Hey, you've mentioned culture
Yeah.
a number of times here already. And if you go to your website, which I've done, there's a list of values there. And of course, the values, the culture is a manifestation of the values.
Yeah.
And we're continually talking to clients about culture and core values as being a differentiator as to how successful you're going to be in exiting. And so a question I was going to ask you, follow up to Corb's, was how have you anchored those core values in your culture? You mentioned one already. We hire people who, and I'm paraphrasing, we hire people who have our values or who we think are going to fit in our culture. Would you agree first, Kris, I think you would, that having a strong culture with clear core values anchored throughout the organization are a differentiator when it comes to exiting, whether or not you'll be successful or not? That's question one. And then question two is, are there other ways in which you've anchored those core values and culture in your business through the years?
Oh boy, I'm gonna have to give you some real quick answers, because that's a long topic. So yeah, I think there can be two types of values. There can be long range values, or there can be short range values. So, us having a long range perspective of the company, wanting it to outlive us, wanting it to continue into the future and continue to do things,
Mhm.
that's different than having values that are like, let's just grow this thing as much as we can, and then we can sell it and walk away from it. So, either are successful ways to build and transition a business. And in our case, it was, rooted in values that we wanted to last. And again, that was another big reason why we were a great prospect for an ESOP. The other thing is that with an ESOP, you can stick around and stay involved. A
Uh-huh.
lot of times people walk away when they sell. In this case, though I relinquished my CEO duties, I'm still involved in the company. I'm still, a part of it, and that's a good thing too. So that's real quick. Do you want me to get into the values, or you want to talk a little more about the ESOP? Where do you want me to go with this?
Yeah, no, let me go back to Corby. Corby, did you have a follow-up question to your other question, or do you have a new question?
Yeah, I was going to ask about the partners. You mentioned you had other partners.
Mhm.
What are their roles? And then how did you guys collectively even come to that initial gate where you said we were all willing to take less money than we might have if we'd have sold to some strategic? Who were those partners? What are they doing? And how'd you all agree? That's hard.
Yeah, well,
Right.
again,
Yeah.
that was a difficult part of it. That's why it took 3 years, because we were all coming from different places.
Hmm.
One of them's younger than two of us are about the same age. Another one's 6-7 years younger. Wasn't as ready to transition, but because of the fact that when you do an ESOP, you can stay deeply involved in the company. That gave him an opportunity to continue to work longer, like he wanted to. And I'll put in another plug for bringing in professionals. Not only do professionals help you put the structure together to do a deal, but they help you deal with those personal issues.
Mhm.
We're three shareholders that have three different goals in mind in this transition and what they want to get out of it. And a professional can help, maneuver you through that. And we experienced that. And it did take some time to get to the point where we all agreed that this would work. And that's just, anytime you're in something with three people, you're not all going to be lockstep. But
Yeah.
I would say again, that whole concept of having long range values and wanting the company to outlive us, we all three shared that. And that's probably what made it most possible. If one of us had been all about, well, I just want to get the most money I can and walk away, it would have been difficult to do it. But that whole concept of we want the company to thrive when we step aside was what really brought it all together.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
Yeah, Chris, to that point, one of our ongoing strong exhortations in the work that we do as that professional group that you continue to reference is to encourage owners to begin planning sooner rather than later, and mostly having in view what you just highlighted there, all the personal things that need to be considered, personal values, goals, and into, if you've got partners that, in your case, it was three different people, three different stages of life. They may have some different goals and so on and so forth that all need to be considered. And really, that's where a lot of hard work ends up being, is helping everyone to come to agreement on the best solution to meet all of their goals. Would you agree with that exhortation to get started sooner rather than later?
Absolutely. So I kind of had a mindset that when I turned 50, I wanted to start working on my transition. There wasn't any real good reason for it other than it sounded like a good idea. And when that happened, I hadn't started on doing that at all. A couple years later, I became convicted of it, that I had once said that at 50, I wanted to start working on my transition, and I didn't, but I'm 52 now. And I started talking to my business partners about it, and frankly, neither of them were like ready to transition. But I just talked about that, well, let's plan it. Let's begin to do that legwork so that when the time comes, we will be ready. And then over time, myself personally looking at it, I had come up with the ESOP might be a great path. Talked to them about it, worked through that, then got to the point of getting their permission to bring someone in to take a look at it. So, it was a 5-year process before we then actually did bring the professionals in and take a look at it. So yes, planning in advance, you don't know what's going to come, and it's always best to be prepared. So I would definitely recommend that for anyone thinking transition. It's not too early to think transition, and it's not too early to start taking steps.
Mhm. Yeah. So Kris, as well, we know that you've been at the helm of this thing for a while, and obviously poured a lot of your life into it, and life has now changed. Any surprises there? What's been the biggest yay and the biggest, oh, I didn't expect that?
Absolutely. And it actually surprised me. The big yay has been how well the company's done, and how the people have stepped up. And now that they see themselves and understand themselves as owners, and knowing that their retirement plan is being built on the profits of the company, and that's just been a huge success and hooray, and it feels great. Now I felt like I did a pretty good job. In fact, with the guy who was going to replace me, we put together a 3-year transition plan. And I'll just give you the quick summaries of it. The first year, we were going to run everything by each other, and then I would make the CEO type decisions. The second year, we were going to run everything by each other, and I'd help him make those CEO type decisions.
That's good.
The third year would be, it's your job, not in title yet, but we're going to run it as though you're the CEO, and you're going to be asking me, when you need it, for advice. And we went through that process, and he was absolutely ready. And it was actually January 1 of this past year, he became the CEO, and I became the executive chairman. And a great success. It was an incredible success. And then I found myself about 3 weeks later going, they don't need me anymore.
Right.
And I should have been celebrating that, but I'm like,
yeah.
Well, I used to be the guy, and now they don't need me anymore. So that was a little bit of transition. He and I talk about it, but you gotta let him go. And he does call me, and we talk, and there's times he needs my advice. There's times I think I ought to give it to him. He doesn't call me for it, and I have to know that that's my role now. So that took a little bit of adjustment. That was a little bit of surprise, because I thought I'd be happy to turn over the day-to-day and not have all that responsibility anymore. But it did kind of hit home,
I bet.
Yeah, well, Kris, statistics show that a great percentage, it's at least 75% of owners are miserable within 2 years after leaving. Now, in prior conversation with you, I know you've got other things going on in life that you're interested in and committed to. You've mentioned a few things here today in our conversation. In your pre-planning, did you start to plan for life after the business once you did turn the reins over?
Absolutely. Another thing, to go with that whole planning theme, you plan your transition, but then it's also important to plan, what's my life going to be once I transition this company? Because most owners, it's what they've done their whole life, and they poured their heart and soul into it. What are they going to do when they don't have that anymore? When they're not the guy anymore, or the gal anymore, they're not the person that everybody goes, what are they going to do? And the people we worked with, they made that a part of it. They're like, okay, 10 years from now, this business is doing great. It's transitioned to an ESOP. Where do you see yourself? What do you see yourself doing? They took myself and my partners through that exercise where, we had to lay out, here's kind of, we don't act, 10-year plans are kind of tough, but here's what we might see ourselves doing 10 years from now. So that's a big part of the planning process. And, that helps me when I had my little pity party if they don't need me anymore. Well, the plan is working perfectly. Stick with the plan and stop feeling sorry for yourself. Let's go.
Oh, how about the employees? When did you bring them into the discussion, and how did they receive it? Not the executives, but the rest of the company.
Yeah, in an ESOP, that's so important. How well you communicate it and how well you educate them is so key, because nobody's going to understand it. And even when you start to tell them, they still don't understand it. I mean, we're 3 years in and it's infancy in understanding it. I'll tell you when they really understand it the most is that first time when you turn over some shares to them.
Mhm.
And it says, you were just, in essence, gifted these shares. They're currently worth this value. They're sitting in your escrow account for when you retire. Then it starts to be real. They're like, wait a minute. Okay, I just got these shares and they're worth this. And if the company continues to grow and the stock price grows, it's going to be worth this someday. That's the simplest piece of making it real. But at the beginning, it's like anything, about 10% of the people are like all excited and studying it and saying this is the greatest thing in the world. And, most of them are like, man, I don't even know what that is. And then there's people at the back end going, that'll never work. So, it's just a process of education, and, it's so critical. And I don't know that we've done a great job on that. We try to, but very important piece. Now, our professionals told us, don't tell them about this until you're really sure you're going to do it. So, you don't want to throw out that you might do an ESOP and then people start studying and then you go, oh, sorry, we decided not to do that. So we did have to kind of keep it under wraps until we were really sure that that's what we were, the approach we were going to take.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, and Kris, did you get your key managers involved? That next level management team that you were talking about earlier, did you get them involved in actually making the decision as to whether or not to go in this direction?
The CEO was involved in the whole time. When we had the three of us meeting with our professionals, he met as well. Then as it began to look real promising, we brought in that next layer. There were 3 of them, because we really wanted to get their feedback. We really wanted to know what they thought about it, and they were all gung-ho. But again, having to confidentiality in case this thing doesn't fly. Don't be telling your, but we need your input. We need to know you have a buy-in to it. We need to know that you see this as something that you feel strongly about leading into the future. And and they did. So that was part of that process. I'd say we brought them in about 6 to 9 months before we actually pulled the trigger.
Yeah. And did you at all consider a partial ESOP? You mentioned the age differential as partners. Was that ever a topic of discussion?
Absolutely. And again, professionals can do this for you. They lay out all the different scenarios. We looked at, okay, what if only 2 of us sell our shares? What if the one that wanted to work longer kept his? And ESOPs, you can make them so many different ways. So we looked at all that, and what helped make that decision was, if we went with 100% ESOP, then the company would no longer, 100% of their profit would no longer be subject to federal tax.
Mm,
And, you know, if it were 80%, then the guy who had his shares, he'd still be paying. It just was, it came down to the fact of, you know what, what's really best for our company, and that is agreeable to all three of us, is let's do 100% ESOP. And we also then were able to, we as sellers held the notes. So it was a 10-year note for the three of us. And that was another reason why it worked, because we're staying involved. We're all on the board. We all have some role in the company. And it just worked out best for us to do that, to do the 100%.
yeah, makes sense. And you discussed a little bit about the kind of the what you're going to do goals afterward, but it sounds as well that you had worked, I would assume you all had worked with your own personal wealth manager, just so that you could make a decision to not maximize sale price when the time came, that you had in a way the option to take less if it needed to. Would that be true?
Yes, absolutely. Another unique thing about our situation is our personal wealth manager are all the same person for the three of us. So that was another, really unique situation, that probably part of why the group told us out of a 1 to 10, you're a 12. It's rare that three partners would all have the same financial manager. So
Absolutely.
yes.
Wow.
Yeah. So Kris, are there, again, ESOPs for small business owners are, we've mentioned some of the things that have to be in place. Next level management team, strong financial performance, strong EBITDA, stable revenues, little to no long-term debt, certain number of employees, things like that. So it's not right. It's not going to be a fit for everybody. But if it is a fit, what are some of the potential pitfalls that you would just caution owners, listeners about, who are considering this, that need to be analyzed prior to potential pitfalls?
Well, again, I know I sound like a broken record, but if you want to go research ESOP by yourself, you're going to do nothing but confuse yourself. You're going to read horror stories. You're going to read, you could read a few things and go, oh, there's no way I'd even think about doing an ESOP, because look at all this. That's why you get a professional in and shows you all these things. I don't know, ours has just worked out so well. People have asked me that before. If you could go back and change something, what would you change? There's not much, because we planned it out so well, and and we're set up so well that there's not a lot. There's some intricacies. There's some things like we wanted to do a key man program, kind of a phantom share type scenario for those people. We got about a year in before we did that. I'd have tried to put that in place prior, than waiting a while to put that in place. We had a unique scenario that I had given some of my shares to an organization called the National Christian Foundation. Some of my shares, which actually built a giving fund for me. And when we sold the company, they were actually a shareholder. So I have a charitable foundation, in essence, that is receiving payments for the business as well. And then I can use those resources to give to the charities that I deem that I'd like to give to. That added some complexity that, even the advisors that we were working with had never done that before. And, we didn't exactly have that nailed down perfectly by the time we closed. It wasn't a big problem, but it did kind of delay the closing, I'd say 45 days trying to get that all squared away, the intricacies of that. So really just a few small things like that is all I really, in our case, would have changed.
Yeah, so that piece right there, thanks for bringing that up, because we'll bring that up with clients in regard to, we're looking to identify not just gaps in the business and preparing the business for eventual exit, but also personal planning gaps. And so we'll ask questions about, their charitable giving and things like that, with the idea of having a donor advised fund or foundation in view. If you were to counsel an owner, how far in advance would you tell them to start planning that piece right there with the donor advised fund and gifting shares to that?
Yeah, I did it like 3 years prior.
Mm.
And, I don't know that, I didn't know about it till then. I might have done it sooner had I known about it. It's a great, if you like to give, if you're a giver, it's a great thing to do. And so many people's resources are tied up in their business, and they might give more if they had the opportunity, but they can't because it's all tied up in their business. But in a scenario like this, you're able to, there is a tax benefit when you do it, but then you're also able to build these donor advised funds that have, a fair amount of liquid resources in them for you to give more. So I think that's something to look at, regardless of if you have a transition in the near future or not.
Very good. So you know what? We've already gone past the time we told you we were going to have you on. You've been very generous, but I'm going to ask you one more question as we wrap up, if you don't mind.
Sure.
We talked earlier about how motivations and goals, if you will, have so much to do with whatever exit route you choose. And so being clear on what that is critical. It's essential for deciding which route to choose. So we're curious, what were your personal, if you're willing to share what your personal motivations were for choosing the ESOP? You mentioned culture. Is there anything else that just motivated you to go in this direction?
Yeah, the main thing that it didn't motivate me at the beginning of my career. The beginning of my career was all about honoring myself and building my business. About halfway through, I really had a mindset change that I wanted my business to honor God. And we began to think about what might that look like? How could we do things that the Lord would be happy with in our business? And that's actually what shaped our culture. Is we wanted to do things in a way that if others looked at us, they would say, what's different about this organization? And what's different would be, well, we're trying to honor and glorify our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ in the work we do. That became the key building block for our culture. We went from, and we had a great culture. My dad established it on hard work and biblical principles and doing the right thing. And, but we just began to really say, what does that look like? And that's what guided us as leaders through it. Not everybody in the company, it didn't become like a religious ceremony. No, it was a legitimate business, but everyone knew where these beliefs come from and what are they grounded in. And that became a great part of why we did an ESOP, because, if we looked at what Jesus did when he left the earth, he turned it over to the people that he'd been spending life with. He had 12 disciples that, he had done life with, and he says, the mission's yours, take it to the ends of the earth. And, I'm going to be with you in spirit, but it's your mission now, go do it. So that was the model. That's kind of, that was the driving force behind it. I know that's somewhat unique, but that was what drove our culture and also drove us to know that this ESOP was what we needed to do.
Yeah, so very much values-based motivations, faith-based in your case, motivations that of course are values. And so that aligns with the exit route of an ESOP. If you've got an owner who has similar values, faith-based or some kind of values-based motivations, then an ESOP is absolutely a good route to consider to accomplish those goals. Kris, this has been fantastic today. Thank you so much for going over the time that I told you that we were going to go, but it's just extremely helpful for listeners to hear from someone who's actually executed one of these exit routes that isn't as frequent as others. And it can seem to be very complicated, and it is actually more so than some of the others. So we can't thank you enough for joining us today. Regarding, what you're involved with now as executive chairman, but beyond that, all the other interests you have in regard to ministry or anything, is there anything, we ask every guest that we have on here, Kris, is there anything that you would like to promote today to the listeners in wrapping up? And then if a listener wanted to reach out to you for a conversation, would you be willing to do that? And if so, how would they contact you? Feel free to say no. but those two questions, is there anything that you'd like to promote? And would you be willing to have a conversation with the listener if they wanted to talk to you?
Sure. How about if they contacted me through you? Does that work? Through your podcast?
That works. Sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I'd be happy to share at any time about what we've been through as an ESOP or our faith-based values. That's important to me. My advice is if anybody says, what's the most important business advice you can give? My advice is it's all about relationships. We make it all about processes and procedures and things like that. But when it comes down to it, what really matters in life are relationships. And I'd like to promote, take the relational approach always before you take the process approach.
Very good.
Well said.
All right. Well, thank you, Kris. We're very grateful. I'm grateful that I was introduced to you by my son, Will. Shout out to Will. Will, thank you. This is a great introduction here.
He's great. He's great.
Wow, we're proud of him. So listeners, if you want help in maximizing the value of your business or planning comprehensively for your eventual exit, you can reach Walter at 301-951-9090 or me and Corb at 301-859-80860. You can also access resources at exitreadiness.com, grfcpa.com, and ennislp.com. Thank you for listening. And until next time on the Exit Readiness Podcast, this is Pat Ennis and Walter Dial signing off.